Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. Before we jump into today's story, we have one quick request. If you enjoy powerful and emotional stories like this one, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a future video. It takes only a moment. It is completely free, and your support helps us continue sharing more unforgettable stories with you. We truly appreciate every subscription. Before we begin, let us know where you are watching from today by leaving your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much for being part of our community. Now, let us return to our main character. The easiest way to hide a hero is to give him a mop instead of a title. Morning light spilled through the towering crystal skylights of the Alliance Naval Academy, washing endless marble corridors with soft bands of gold that reflected from polished steel walls. Cadets from more than 30 worlds hurried toward the Grand Assembly Hall, their freshly pressed uniforms displaying bright insignias earned through discipline, intelligence, and ambition. Every polished boot echoed with purpose. Every conversation carried dreams of command. At the far end of the corridor, almost invisible among the moving crowd, Daniel Carter slowly guided a worn janitor's cart across the gleaming floor. His gray hair rested neatly beneath a faded work cap. His white human face showed the quiet lines of age rather than exhaustion. He never rushed. Every careful sweep of the mop left the marble shining behind him, as though dignity could be measured one clean floor at a time. Hanging from the left side of his faded maintenance jacket were several old military medals. Their ribbons had lost much of their color after countless years, yet each piece of polished metal remained carefully cleaned. A group of young alien cadets noticed them immediately. One with silver skin nudged another and laughed. "Look at that." The janitor decorated himself. Another leaned closer before grinning. "Maybe they give medals for cleaning classrooms." Soft laughter spread through the hallway. A third cadet tilted his head toward Daniel. "Do humans really wear old souvenirs to work?" Daniel heard every word. He simply paused long enough to straighten one medal that had shifted while he worked. His expression never changed. He dipped the mop back into the bucket, wrung it carefully, and continued down the corridor with the same calm rhythm as before. Near one classroom doorway, an elderly history instructor quietly watched the exchange. His eyes rested on Daniel's medals for a fraction longer than anyone else. Something about them made him lower his gaze instead of joining the laughter. Daniel noticed the old professor, offering only a small nod before returning to his work. The professor nodded back with unexpected respect. Around them, the academy continued preparing for the most important inspection of the year. Flags were adjusted. Honor guards rehearsed their timing. Every surface received one final inspection before the arrival of the Supreme Fleet Admiral. Yet while officers worried about perfect ceremonies, the old human quietly polished the academy floor until it reflected the ceiling like still water, leaving behind no trace of himself except a path so clean that everyone walked across it without ever wondering who had made it possible. Daniel Carter followed the same routine every morning with the quiet precision of someone who believed even the smallest task deserved respect. Before sunrise, he unlocked the maintenance closet, checked every bottle on the cleaning cart, folded fresh towels into perfect squares, and polished the brass handle of the old mop until it reflected the hallway lights. He never skipped a step. To most cadets, he was simply part of the building, as ordinary as the walls or the polished floors beneath their boots. They passed him every day without learning his name. The medals resting on his faded jacket attracted far more attention than the man wearing them. Throughout the morning, whispers followed him from corridor to corridor. "Did you see the old human again?" one cadet murmured while adjusting his ceremonial uniform. "I counted 6 medals today." Another laughed. "Maybe he bought them at a souvenir market." Their jokes spread quickly, growing more imaginative with every retelling. Daniel never looked offended. He simply stopped beside a display case filled with photographs of graduating classes, picked up a tiny piece of dust from the glass with 2 careful fingers, and continued pushing his cart. Near the academy library, the elderly history instructor approached him carrying a stack of worn books. "Good morning, Daniel," the professor said warmly. "The hall has never looked better." Daniel smiled. "Thank you, Professor Alden. The cadets deserve to begin an important day in a place they can be proud of." The professor's eyes drifted once more toward the medals. "You still keep every one of them polished." Daniel gently adjusted the highest ribbon before answering. Not because they remind me of what I did, because they remind me of the people who never came home to wear theirs. The professor lowered his eyes with quiet understanding. Before he could reply, a loud announcement echoed through every hallway. Attention, all personnel. Final preparations for the arrival of Supreme Fleet Admiral Soraya will begin in 30 minutes. All ceremonial routes must remain clear. Instantly, the Academy transformed into controlled motion. Honor guards hurried toward their assigned positions. Instructors checked uniforms one final time. Cadets rehearsed their salutes beneath enormous Alliance banners hanging from the vaulted ceiling. Daniel simply guided his cleaning cart toward the grand processional hall, where the Admiral herself would soon walk. As he dipped his mop into fresh water, he noticed one small footprint left across the perfectly polished marble. Without hesitation, he quietly erased it, never realizing that before the day was over, thousands of eyes would be searching for the old human everyone had spent the morning pretending not to see. The Academy grew quieter as the hour of the inspection approached, not because there were fewer people, but because anticipation had replaced conversation. Every corridor shimmered beneath fresh polish. Alliance banners hung perfectly still from vaulted ceilings nearly 80 feet above the marble floor. Rows of cadets stood in crisp formation, each uniform inspected down to the smallest insignia. Even the air carried the faint scent of polished brass, machine oil, and freshly cleaned stone. Daniel Carter guided his janitor's cart through the grand processional hall one final time, stopping only to straighten a ceremonial flag that had shifted slightly out of line. To him, details mattered. Small imperfections had a habit of becoming large distractions. As he stepped aside, another group of cadets entered the hall, rehearsing the timing of their salute. One of them noticed Daniel standing near the entrance with his faded jacket and weathered medals. "Careful," he joked loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Do not block the Admiral's path. We would not want anyone mistaking you for an actual veteran." Laughter echoed softly beneath the enormous ceiling. Another cadet glanced at the medals and smirked. Maybe he is hoping the Admiral will promote him to chief custodian. Daniel simply moved his cleaning cart another few feet away from the center aisle, making certain there would be plenty of room for the arriving delegation. His calm silence somehow made the laughter feel louder. From across the hall, Professor Alden watched the exchange without saying a word. His expression carried neither anger nor surprise, only quiet disappointment. He had spent decades teaching military history, and he had learned that the greatest lessons were often ignored until experience forced people to see them. A low vibration suddenly traveled through the Academy walls. The massive observation windows overlooking the landing platform slowly darkened before becoming transparent once more. Outside, a sleek command shuttle descended through the morning sky, surrounded by escort craft flying in flawless formation. Sunlight reflected across the polished hull like liquid silver as landing thrusters gently settled the vessel onto the ceremonial platform. Every conversation inside the Academy ended at once. Honor guards straightened instinctively. Officers adjusted their uniforms one final time. Cadets stood perfectly still, their eyes fixed on the towering entrance doors leading toward the landing bay. Daniel quietly parked his cleaning cart beside a marble column and picked up his mop, intending to finish one last section of floor before the procession arrived. He never noticed that the first person stepping down from the command shuttle had already seen him through the glass long before the doors were scheduled to open. The great bronze doors of the grand processional hall opened with slow, measured precision, and every sound inside the Academy seemed to disappear at once. Rows of cadets stood perfectly still beneath towering Alliance banners, their polished boots aligned with exact military discipline. Sunlight streamed through the crystal skylights, reflecting across the marble floor. Daniel Carter had finished cleaning only moments earlier until it shone like a calm lake. Supreme Fleet Admiral Soraya entered first, her turquoise skin illuminated beneath the ceremonial lights, her white command cape flowing gently behind her as senior officers followed in silent formation. Every Academy official snapped into a flawless salute the instant she crossed the threshold. Without breaking stride, Soraya acknowledged them with the smallest nod, her sharp eyes calmly studying the hall instead of the ceremony prepared in her honor. She noticed the spotless floor, the perfectly aligned banners, the quiet order hidden inside hundreds of tiny details that most visitors would never see. Then, halfway down the corridor, her footsteps slowed. 20 feet ahead, an elderly human quietly rolled a cleaning bucket away from the center aisle before lifting his old mop to make certain no one would need to step around it. Daniel never looked toward the arriving delegation. He simply finished wringing the mop, folded the cloth neatly over the bucket, and prepared to leave before becoming an inconvenience. Soraya stopped walking completely. The officers behind her almost collided before catching themselves. Confused whispers spread through the escort line. The Academy Commandant glanced toward the Admiral, uncertain why the carefully rehearsed procession had suddenly frozen. Soraya did not answer anyone. Her eyes remained fixed on the faded metals resting against Daniel's weathered maintenance jacket. For several long seconds, she neither moved nor spoke. Daniel finally sensed the silence surrounding him and slowly turned. His expression remained calm, as always. He lowered his eyes politely, giving the visiting admiral enough room to continue down the hall. Instead of walking forward, Soraya took one quiet step toward the old janitor. Around them, hundreds of cadets watched in complete confusion. Some recognized the medals they had mocked only minutes earlier. Others exchanged uncertain glances, unable to understand why the highest-ranking officer in the Alliance had abandoned the ceremonial route for a man carrying nothing more impressive than a mop and a dented cleaning bucket. Professor Alden quietly closed his eyes for a brief moment, as though he had been waiting years to witness exactly what was about to happen. Supreme Fleet Admiral Soraya came to a complete stop only a few feet from Daniel Carter. The enormous hall remained so quiet that the faint drip of water from the janitor's mop bucket seemed impossibly loud. Hundreds of cadets stood frozen in perfect formation, unsure whether to maintain their salute or simply watch. Senior officers exchanged uncertain glances, searching one another's faces for an explanation that none of them possessed. Daniel looked up politely, surprised that the Admiral had interrupted the carefully rehearsed procession because of him. He removed one worn work glove and held the mop upright with quiet respect. "Good morning, Admiral," he said gently. "I apologize if I am in your way." Soraya did not answer immediately. Her eyes rested on the faded ribbons above his heart, studying every medal with unmistakable recognition. She stepped even closer until only a few feet separated them. Then, without warning, the highest-ranking officer in the Alliance fleet drew herself to full attention. Every movement was precise. Every gesture carried the weight of decades of military tradition. She raised her right hand in a flawless salute directed not toward a decorated general, nor toward the Academy Commandant, but toward the elderly human janitor holding a simple mop. A collective breath seemed to vanish from the hall. No one moved. No one spoke. The cadets who had mocked Daniel only an hour earlier stared in complete disbelief. One quietly lowered his eyes toward the medals he had laughed at, suddenly unable to meet the old man's gaze. Daniel remained motionless for a moment, almost uncomfortable beneath the attention. Then, with the same calm dignity that had guided every part of his morning, he slowly returned the salute. His posture changed so naturally that years seemed to disappear from his weathered frame. For a single heartbeat, he no longer looked like a janitor. He looked exactly like someone who had spent a lifetime carrying responsibility without ever asking to be recognized for it. Soraya lowered her hand first. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly through the silent hall. "It is an honor to see you again, Commander Carter." The words struck the Academy harder than any alarm ever could. Cadets looked from Daniel to one another, convinced they had misunderstood. The Academy Commandant took an involuntary step forward before stopping himself. Professor Alden quietly smiled for the first time that morning. Daniel simply exhaled with a faint, almost embarrassed smile and glanced down at the mop still resting in his hand, as though he wished the ceremony had never stopped at all. No one in the grand processional hall moved for several long seconds. The silence felt almost sacred, stretching beneath the towering ceiling, while every pair of eyes remained fixed on the elderly human standing beside a simple cleaning cart. Supreme Fleet Admiral Soraya lowered her salute with quiet respect, but her expression did not change. It was the expression of someone greeting a mentor rather than honoring a legend. Daniel Carter shifted his grip on the wooden handle of the mop and offered an almost apologetic smile. "Admiral," he said softly, You really did not have to stop the ceremony for me. Soraya answered with a slight shake of her head. The ceremony stopped because it finally reached the most important person in this hall. A ripple of astonishment spread through the assembled officers. The Academy Commandant stared at Daniel as though seeing him for the first time. Several cadets instinctively looked back toward the faded medals they had, mocked only hours earlier, now realizing that every ribbon had been earned rather than displayed. Professor Alden quietly removed his glasses and smiled to himself. He had waited years for history to introduce itself without opening a single textbook. Soraya turned toward the Academy staff. "Open Archive 7, she instructed calmly. Authorization Sigma Prime. A holographic display rose from the center of the hall, illuminating the polished marble with soft blue light. Classified records began to appear one after another. Decorations for extraordinary leadership, humanitarian citations, commendations from worlds that no longer existed as independent governments because they had voluntarily joined the Alliance after receiving aid during times of crisis. At the center of every document appeared the same name: Commander Daniel Carter, founder of the Emergency Civilian Protection Initiative, recipient of the Alliance Star of Honor, declined promotion to Fleet High Command, voluntarily retired. The murmurs disappeared as quickly as they had begun. Soraya continued speaking, her voice steady and filled with unmistakable gratitude. "Before I ever commanded a ship, I was a frightened cadet assigned to Commander Carter's rescue division. He taught us that the first duty of a leader was never glory. It was making certain that everyone under your care returned home with hope." Daniel lowered his eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the attention surrounding him. "That was a very long time ago," he said quietly. Soraya smiled gently. "Perhaps, but the lives shaped by your example are still serving today." Around the hall, the cadets no longer saw an old janitor wearing forgotten medals. They saw a man who had quietly carried greatness without ever needing anyone else to notice. SUA, the Academy remained unusually quiet long after the classified records faded from the holographic display. Hundreds of cadets still stood in formation, yet the confidence many of them had carried that morning had quietly given way to reflection. Daniel Carter noticed their lowered eyes and uncomfortable expressions. He had seen that look before. It appeared whenever pride finally made room for humility. Without saying another word, he picked up his mop, wheeled the cleaning cart toward a nearby corner, and began wiping away the faint footprints left behind by the assembled crowd. The simple sound of the damp cloth sliding across polished marble echoed gently through the hall. One young cadet stepped out of formation and approached him hesitantly. It was the same silver-skinned student who had laughed at the medals only hours earlier. His voice carried none of the confidence it once had. "Commander Carter," he said quietly, "may I ask you something?" Daniel looked up with the same patient smile he had worn all morning. "Of course." The cadet glanced toward the old mop before meeting Daniel's eyes again. "After everything you accomplished, why would you choose to become a janitor?" The question lingered in the stillness. Even Supreme Fleet Admiral Soraya remained silent, waiting for the answer. Daniel rested both hands on the wooden handle of the mop for a moment before speaking. "Because every generation believes leadership begins on a bridge," he said gently. "But it begins much earlier than that. It begins with learning to respect work that no one applauds." He looked around the magnificent hall, its marble floor reflecting every banner overhead. If a future officer walks past a dirty hallway believing someone else's job does not matter, that officer will someday walk past people the same way. The cadet listened without interrupting. Daniel dipped the mop into clean water once more and continued. "A clean floor does not make headlines. Neither does helping a stranger, fixing broken equipment, or staying behind after everyone else leaves. Yet those quiet choices are what build crews that trust one another." Professor Alden smiled softly, recognizing another lesson that would never appear in any academy manual. The young cadet slowly lowered his head. "I understand now," he whispered. Daniel shook his head with gentle kindness. "No," he replied. "You have only started to understand. The important part comes tomorrow, when no one is watching, and you choose to respect every person who serves beside you, no matter what uniform they wear." Supreme Fleet Admiral Soraya waited until the hall had become completely still before speaking again. Her voice was calm, yet every word carried the quiet weight of memory rather than authority. There is one story that has never appeared in any public archive, she said as her eyes rested on Daniel Carter. Commander Carter made certain of that. The holographic display above the center of the hall awakened once more, this time showing an old recording faded by decades of storage. A much younger Soraya appeared on the screen wearing the uniform of a nervous Academy cadet. The recording showed an emergency evacuation exercise that had unexpectedly become a real disaster when a transport vessel lost power while carrying hundreds of civilians. Panic spread through the bridge as officers argued over procedures and responsibilities. In the middle of the confusion, Commander Daniel Carter quietly stood from his command chair and issued only one instruction. Stop counting regulations. Start counting people. The recording shifted to another moment. Daniel was helping frightened families board rescue shuttles before allowing any senior officers to leave. His own rank was almost impossible to notice because he spent the entire operation carrying supplies, comforting children, and encouraging exhausted crew members. When the final passenger reached safety, he simply thanked his crew before disappearing behind the last departing shuttle. The recording ended without applause, without medals, and without celebration. The hall returned to silence. Soraya looked toward the assembled cadets. That day I asked Commander Carter why he never spoke about what he had accomplished. A faint smile appeared on her face as she repeated his answer from memory. He told me that if people remembered his name more clearly than the lives they were responsible for protecting, then he had failed as a leader. Daniel lowered his eyes with quiet embarrassment, as though he wished the recording had never been shown. There were thousands of good people beside me, he said softly. No one saves anyone alone. Soraya nodded respectfully. Exactly. That is why every officer who served under you became stronger. You never taught us to admire a commander. You taught us to notice the people standing beside us. Around the hall, the cadets looked at Daniel with entirely different eyes. The faded medals no longer seemed like symbols of victory. They had become quiet reminders that true greatness often walked unnoticed through ordinary hallways, carrying a mop in one hand and humility in the other. When the official ceremony finally resumed, it no longer followed the program printed in every guest booklet. No one seemed interested in speeches about strategy or fleet expansion anymore. Instead, Supreme Fleet Admiral Soraya turned toward the assembled cadets and quietly stepped aside, leaving the center of the grand processional hall empty. She did not need to invite Daniel Carter forward. Every person present already understood who belonged there. Daniel looked almost amused by the unexpected attention. He leaned his mop carefully against the cleaning cart, smoothed the front of his weathered maintenance jacket, and walked to the center of the polished marble floor with the same unhurried pace he had used every morning for years. He looked across hundreds of young faces waiting for profound words from a legendary commander. After a long moment, he simply smiled. "Take care of one another," he said. "Everything else can be learned." That was all. No dramatic speech followed. No stories of distant campaigns. No praise for his own service. The simplicity of the sentence settled quietly into the hall, finding a place deeper than applause ever could. One by one, the cadets raised their hands in salute. This time no officer ordered the gesture. No ceremony required it. Respect had arrived on its own. Professor Alden watched silently from the back of the hall, knowing the Academy had just experienced the most important lesson it would teach all year. As the gathering slowly dispersed, several cadets stepped aside to allow maintenance workers, technicians, kitchen staff, and custodians to pass first. Small gestures, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention. Daniel noticed them immediately. He smiled to himself, picked up his mop, and quietly returned to the section, a floor he had been cleaning before the Admiral arrived. There was still work to finish before the afternoon classes began. Soraya paused at the exit and glanced back one final time. The old commander was already focused on removing a few faint footprints from the marble, moving with the same patience that had once guided frightened crews through impossible days. She realized that nothing about him had truly changed. Only the people around him had finally learned how to see. Outside, the Academy bells marked the beginning of a new training day. Inside, sunlight reflected across the spotless floor until the faded medals on Daniel Carter's jacket shone for a brief moment before disappearing beneath the quiet rhythm of ordinary work. reminding everyone who witnessed that morning that the greatest leaders never asked the world to remember their names. They simply left every place and every person better than they had found them.